They call him the world's greatest philanthropist. But what if the biggest act of giving in history is actually the smartest business move ever made? He's handed out billions, reshaped nations, and earned a halo of compassion. But behind the applause lies a system so calculated it could outsmart governments themselves. This isn't just generosity. This is power, wearing the mask of kindness. And tonight, we're pulling that mask off. They call him the most generous man alive. Yet some whisper he's the shrewdest strategist the world has ever seen. Bill Gates, the man who once built a digital empire so powerful it rewrote the rules of capitalism, is now known less for software and more for staggering philanthropy. Tens of billions flowing out of his fortune year after year through the vast machinery of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. To the world, it looks like an ocean of kindness, a billionaire giving back. But behind the soft smiles and quiet speeches lies a question so sharp it cuts through the glitter. Is this true selflessness or the smartest tax strategy of all time? Pause for a moment and imagine this. You spend decades conquering the world's tech industry, stacking wealth so immense it eclipses entire nations. Then suddenly you pivot. You start signing billion-dollar checks, dismantling your own fortune piece by piece. At first, the media cheers, the crowds applaud, and history starts sketching your halo. But deep inside boardrooms and financial think tanks, another narrative quietly spreads. Maybe this isn't just generosity. Maybe it's a long game of power, of influence, of legacy engineering, where giving is not the opposite of gaining, but the ultimate way to preserve it. To understand this paradox, we have to rewind the clock. Bill Gates didn't rise by accident. He rose by outthinking, outmaneuvering, and outcalculating everyone around him. From the early days of Microsoft, he played capitalism like chess. Each move cold, strategic, brilliant. He crushed competitors, dominated markets, and transformed software from an obscure niche into the beating heart of the modern economy. That mindset didn't vanish when he left the company. It simply evolved. Today, his battlefield is philanthropy, and his currency isn't just dollars. It's perception, influence, and control over the future itself. Here's the uncomfortable truth. When billionaires give, they don't just give. They redirect. Money leaves one hand, but not always their world. Foundations, trusts, donor-advised funds. These aren't just vessels of charity. They're financial fortresses. Donations can bring enormous tax deductions, shielding billions from government reach. The public sees generosity. The accountants see preservation. And somewhere between those two realities, Bill Gates stands, half saint, half strategist, while the world argues over which half is real. And this is why his story demands our attention. Because it's not just about him. It's about what happens when unimaginable wealth collides with the machinery of public good. When one man's decision to give back can shape global health policy, education systems, even food security. If it's altruism, it's heroic. If it's strategy, it's genius and terrifying. So tonight, we're going to peel back every layer, expose every mechanism, and follow every dollar until we see the truth behind the curtain. Why does Bill Gates give away billions? And what does he get in return? To understand the game, you must first understand the playing field. On the surface, philanthropy looks simple. Rich people give money away. But the deeper you go, the more the architecture of that system reveals itself. Not as a loose act of kindness, but as a meticulously engineered machine. And at the heart of that machine sits a structure called a private foundation, the very vehicle through which Bill Gates channels much of his fortune. These foundations are not just charities. They are financial organisms, tax-sheltered, strategically controlled, and legally designed to preserve capital while projecting benevolence. Here's how it works. When someone like Gates donates, he often does it not by writing a personal check to a cause, but by transferring assets, usually stocks or other appreciated investments, into a foundation. The moment he does that, something powerful happens. He gets a massive tax deduction based on the market value of those assets. Not only does he reduce his taxable income that year, he also avoids paying capital gains taxes he would have owed if he had sold those stocks for cash. In essence, wealth that would have gone to the government now stays inside an entity he controls. It's like moving money from his right pocket to his left, but the world applauds because the left pocket has the word charity on it. The brilliance of this structure is staggering. A private foundation like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation can invest its endowment, grow it, and only needs to spend about 5% of its assets each year on actual charitable activities to maintain its tax-exempt status. The remaining 95%, it stays invested, compounding. Imagine this. Gates moves billions of dollars of Microsoft stock into the foundation, claims a tax deduction, avoids capital gains taxes, and then watches that money continue to grow under his control. Shielded from estate taxes, shielded from corporate taxes, shielded from almost everything. He loses ownership, but keeps control. This is not illegal. It is not even hidden. It's the way the system is designed. And Gates has mastered that design. Through the foundation, he can direct vast flows of money into global health initiatives, education reforms, agricultural programs, shaping entire sectors of human civilization according to his vision. And because foundations are governed by boards often made up of the founder's close allies, that control can last for generations. It's philanthropy, but it's also power laundering, converting private wealth into public influence without surrendering control. This is where the moral tension sharpens. If giving can also preserve power, then what does giving even mean? Is it generosity, or strategy cloaked in generosity's language? Most people see Bill Gates handing away billions and imagine those billions dis. But in truth, they're often just moving into a new, protected domain. They are still buying influence, still generating returns, still part of the ecosystem he oversees. And every time a billionaire takes this path, the same pattern repeats. Applause from the public, tax deductions from the government, and an ever-tightening grip on the future from the donor. And so we return to the haunting question, what if philanthropy, at its highest levels, isn't the opposite of capitalism, but its final evolution? What if this isn't Gates abandoning wealth, but weaponizing generosity as a form of capital, a way to sculpt the world in his image, tax-free, forever? Because if that's true, then his giving isn't an end to his empire. It's the empire's most brilliant expansion. When wealth grows beyond imagination, it stops obeying the normal rules of money and starts behaving like gravity. It pulls things into its orbit, institutions, governments, even entire nations. This is what happened when Bill Gates began pouring billions through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation into global health. Malaria programs, vaccine distribution, sanitation systems. Suddenly, private money was doing what government had failed to do for decades. The media hailed him as a savior. Politicians lined up to shake his hand. But something subtle and seismic shifted in that moment. Public policy, once shaped by democracies, began bending to the will of one unelected billionaire. The foundation became a force so vast it could outspend the budgets of the World Health Organization and smaller nations combined. When the COVID-19 pandemic erupted, it was Gates's network funding vaccine development, shaping patent policies, influencing global distribution strategies. Health ministers from across the planet waited on the decisions of a private boardroom in Seattle. Think about that. Decisions about who lives, who gets access, who waits, made not by elected leaders accountable to the people, but by a man accountable only to his vision. It worked. Lives were saved. Progress was made. But at what cost to democracy itself? Critics call it philanthrocapitalism, a system where generosity becomes a lever of power. Through strategic giving, Gates doesn't just fund projects, he reshapes agendas. He funds education reforms that redefine school systems, invests in agriculture initiatives that influence food policy, sponsors health research that sets the global conversation. And every time he moves, governments often follow. Not because they're forced to, but because his wealth creates momentum too powerful to resist. Money creates results. Results create headlines. Headlines create political pressure. And slowly, quietly, his private priorities become public priorities. This is why the backlash has been growing. Activists warn that philanthropy at this scale undermines democracy by concentrating decision-making in private hands. Journalists have raised alarms about conflicts of interest when the same man funding vaccine development also holds investments in pharmaceutical companies, when the same voice pushing education policy also profits from education technology. Even former insiders whisper concerns that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has become a shadow government, unelected, unaccountable, yet deeply embedded in the machinery of the modern world. It's not just power, it's invisible power, influence that looks like kindness. But the most unsettling part is how invisible it feels to the public. When people see Bill Gates on stage speaking about eradicating disease or lifting children out of poverty, they see hope. They see compassion. They rarely see how every initiative strengthens his network of influence, aligns entire industries around his priorities, and cements his legacy as the architect of the future. Think about that. Decisions about who lives, who gets access, who waits, made not by elected leaders accountable to the people, but by a man accountable only to his vision. It worked. Lives were saved. Progress was made. But at what cost to democracy itself? Critics call it philanthrocapitalism, a system where generosity becomes a lever of power. Through strategic giving, Gates doesn't just fund projects, he reshapes agendas. He funds education reforms that redefine school systems, invests in agriculture initiatives that influence food policy, sponsors health research that sets the global conversation. And every time he moves, governments often follow. Not because they're forced to, but because his wealth creates momentum too powerful to resist. Money creates results. Results create headlines. Headlines create political pressure. And slowly, quietly, his private priorities become public priorities. This is why the backlash has been growing. Activists warn that philanthropy at this scale undermines democracy by concentrating decision-making in private hands. Journalists have raised alarms about conflicts of interest when the same man funding vaccine development also holds investments in pharmaceutical companies, when the same voice pushing education policy also profits from education technology. Even former insiders whisper concerns that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has become a shadow government, unelected, unaccountable, yet deeply embedded in the machinery of the modern world. It's not just power. It's invisible power, influence that looks like kindness. But the most unsettling part is how invisible it feels to the public. When people see Bill Gates on stage speaking about eradicating disease or lifting children out of poverty, they see hope. They see compassion. They rarely see how every initiative strengthens his network of influence, aligns entire industries around his priorities, and cements his legacy as the architect of the future. Here is the truth most people never dare whisper. When the world finally writes the last chapter of Bill Gates' story, it may not remember him for Microsoft or even for wealth. It will remember him as the man who tried to bend the future. He has spent decades moving pieces on a chessboard few can even see, converting fortune into foundations, capital into compassion, and influence into something almost eternal. Whether driven by kindness or calculation, or something far more complex, he has embedded himself into the bloodstream of the world. And the deeper you look, the more you realize this isn't charity. This is architecture. He isn't giving money away. He's building an empire that doesn't wear his name, but will carry his fingerprint forever. Look closely, and you can see the blueprint. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is not just a philanthropic institution. It is an ecosystem. It funds health programs in Africa, education reforms in America, agricultural systems in Asia, while simultaneously investing its endowment in the very markets those systems depend on. It shapes narratives, policies, technologies, and, through sheer scale, it becomes inescapable. Long after Gates is gone, the foundation can continue operating with the momentum of a sovereign nation, quietly steering the future from behind the curtain. This is not the dismantling of wealth. It is the immortalization of it. A dynasty wrapped in the language of compassion. And yet, maybe that's what makes it so disorienting. Because none of this proves he is sinister. It proves only that he is strategic. Perhaps he truly believes, with every cell in his body, that this is the best way to help humanity, to take the wealth that capitalism created and weaponize it against suffering, disease, and poverty. Perhaps the tax advantages are just tools, not motives. Perhaps he is not an overlord, but an engineer, a man who saw the world breaking and decided to rebuild it, even if no one asked him to. If that's true, then his giving is not deception, but defiance, a refusal to let death scatter what life allowed him to gather. But even if that is true, a darker question remains, one that lingers long after the applause fades. Should any one human being be allowed this much power? Should the fate of millions rest in the hands of someone no one elected, no one can challenge, and no one can stop? Because the danger is not that Gates is evil. The danger is that he is human, and human judgment is fallible. Human vision is limited. Human dreams, however grand, are still only dreams. If he is right, the world will rise on the shoulders of his giving. If he is wrong, it will quietly bend under the weight of a single man's will. So as we look at Bill Gates giving away billions, dollars cascading like waterfalls, headlines proclaiming his goodness, history sketching his halo, we must remember this. Giving is not the opposite of power. Sometimes it is its final form, and that is why this story matters. Because this is not just the story of Gates. It is the story of what happens when wealth grows so vast it begins to rewrite the world in its own image. And now, as the lines between altruism and strategy blur into silence, the world must ask itself the question he never will. Is he saving humanity or quietly owning it?